What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and I wanted to talk about Andrew Yang and the data that I can see by having 10 videos out there around this topic and comparing that data set with the average on a few different factors to see what's going on, to give us more data around the population of people who are supporting or interested at least in Andrew Yang, and therefore supporting just from the sheer, I'm making this video because this is interesting, right? And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about advertising for Andrew Yang and get into some of that, cost of that, as well as the statistics around the distribution of the population for these things based on certain keywords. But before I get into any of that freaking nonsense, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of context, so hopefully some of this makes more sense. Now, if this is your first time here, my name is Sam. What's up? And if you're returning, it's good to freaking see you. Now, to give you context, I started making these videos, right? I have about 10 of them out around Andrew Yang and politics. And that's because about 4 weeks ago, I would say, probably 4 weeks ago, this character came up on my YouTube. And for that to happen is intriguing in and of itself because I pay zero attention to politics. The maybe only headlines that I may read are things about Trump. I don't follow politics at all whatsoever, not even in the slightest. And for this character to come up in my sphere or interest on YouTube was intriguing for me. Or just, I thought about it after the fact. So I saw that on there. Then I was over on Instagram, and this guy was showing up on Instagram too in the Explore page. So I was like, that's interesting. For somebody like me who lives so far off the beaten path in terms of the way I live my life relative to the rest of the population, like, I'm a fucking weird dude. For this character to come up in my sphere, something's going on. So then what I did is I was like, ooh, let's check Google. And I checked for the polling on this dude. And he wasn't even in the top 10 in most polls. So I was like, that's weird. Because if this came up on my radar, somebody who's well off the fucking beaten path, why isn't it showing up in the polling data? Like, that's weird. Like, it didn't make sense to me. And then I decided to take a look at some of the data behind the Google search trends around Andrew Yang versus some of these other candidates for presidency. By the way, if you want to check out any of the full analysis videos, click on the channel and go back and look at them. By the way, when you're clicking back on the channel, just press that subscribe button. Anyways, the YouTube search trends for these characters and how their social was doing, how hashtags were trending, meaning people talking about these players on Instagram and Twitter, or the analysis of their websites to see how their websites, their Andrew Yang website, Joe Biden website, etc., ranked on a global basis in terms of popularity. So we took a look at some of those things, and in a lot of those, Andrew Yang was ahead. However, it didn't show up in the polling data at all. So on the one hand, we have the poll saying that there's these 5 people are the most likely to win. And then on the other hand, we look at the actual data and we see this other guy, Andrew Yang, that's not even showing up on the top 10 over here. And he's winning in most categories when it comes to looking at these different ways of understanding relevance in 2019. So this is what's interesting to me, and that was why I started making these videos. And now I wanted to know, because of that, I wonder if there's interesting data in my own videos Because if it stands out like that, right, and between polling and what's actually happening in the world, right, like the polling data says this, but what's the actual reality is completely fucking different, like 100%. So, and I think that it's probably trending in the right direction. It probably has a lot to do with the methodology and the size of the population that a lot of these polling things are. The way they do this polling. But if you subscribe, I'm going to make a video on the polling analysis in a few minutes or something like that. So make sure you press that subscribe button. Anyways, now let's get into the data. So over 10 videos in the past about 15 or so days, about 2 weeks, I've made 10 videos on this topic. And the super macro view within this is that the number of monetized playbacks as a percentage of the total number of views. So this is essentially Google saying, we like to put ads here. We like to, so like the higher the percentage, the more that Google likes to put those ads there. They feel safe, or it's just really profitable for them. Probably a little bit of both. But it's astonishing the difference between my totals for the month versus these 10 videos. So we'll start with the totals for my channel in terms of total monetized playbacks of 4,737. Now the total views for the month were 20,468. So when you do that and you take monetized playbacks divided by the total number of views, that's 23.14%. So about for every 4 views, there was 1 monetized playback. Now, when we shift over to the 10 videos around politics and Andrew Yang, we have the same thing, total monetized playbacks divided by total number of views specifically for these 10 videos. And that's 48.37%. So on the macro, Google's like, I'm fucking showing a lot more ads on this type of video. So that was super interesting. On a little bit of a side note, super interesting though, because they're twice as likely to have an ad, right? So instead of 1 out of 4, it's 1 out of 2. Right? There's a much higher probability that there's going to be an ad on this video versus other videos, which is kind of very, very interesting. Now that kind of ties into some other things. One specifically is the total watch time. So not necessarily the total watch time would be also a very interesting one to take a look at, but we're first going to take a look at the total, the average. So my average duration per video, per view, on the past 28 days, or 15 days or so, I apologize, whatever the same length as the videos have been out, was 2 minutes and 56 seconds. The average for these 10 videos was 6 minutes and 26 seconds. So more than double in terms of people's interest in these videos, because the duration on the video, people are staying for over twice the length. 2 minutes and 56 seconds on this side versus 6 minutes and 26 seconds. That's tremendous. Now, that other area I had just mentioned, we will take a look here and see what the total number of watch time is as a percentage. Let's take a look here. So it's about 1/3 of all the watch time for the whole entire month, which was kind of interesting. And when you look at the total number of views, which is kind of interesting, right? So we've got about 34-ish%, 35% of all the watch time for the whole month came from these videos. But when you look at the views, less than 25% came from these. So out of this very small amount of views that I had, on 20,000 views over here, 20,500 versus 3,300 over here. So out of these 3,300, I got 35% of all the watch time for the whole entire month, because that average amount of time people watch is more than double, which is insane. And now that led me into like thinking, like, what about like the cost of these ads? Like, what if, or yeah, you know what I mean? Like, people are paying to get in front of these people, but I was like, Andrew Yang, based on when I've been searching during these videos, he doesn't have an ad that comes up. So I was curious to kind of like understand a little bit more about that. And to give me a reference point, I also did this for Joe Biden so I could see the difference here. So what I did was I went into Google AdWords. I have an account with Google AdWords. I went in there and looked for Andrew Yang and Joe Biden. And then it gives you an estimate of the, just based on what they predict, right? Based on the average volume of searches on these things, like they're gonna think that the average number of clicks is going to be this, and I would bet over a longer period of time they're probably pretty accurate within a margin of whatever that margin might be, 5%, 3%, 10%. I feel like it's pretty accurate. So the total number of clicks in the total cost. So what I did was I put a cost per click, and I started with the maximum amount that you would pay for an ad being $1. And I went from $1 up to $8. And when I looked at the data here at $1, so this is the max you would pay for an ad, it costs more for Andrew Yang to get one click than it does for Joe Biden. However, as we take more steps forwards, that story starts to change. So at $2, we have a average cost per click that is $1.23 versus $1.14. So at first there was a 25-cent difference. Now there's only a 9-cent difference. And at 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, it's all more expensive for Biden to get get that number of clicks. So I thought that was interesting because. And I don't do a ton of advertising or know a ton about this stuff, but I think that intuitively we could kind of just logically think that, and somebody please can give me more info down below if the thought process behind this is incorrect, that on average it'd probably be cheaper for Yang to advertise than it would be for Biden on a cost per click basis only. You know what I mean? So I thought that was kind of interesting, which also led me further down the rabbit hole to understand the statistics around this data pile that we're looking at, right? So we've got two of these piles, and I want to see what that distribution looks like. Remember the bell curve, right? So I'm going to look at the kurtosis, which tells me how fat those tails are on the bell curve. Like if they're not, it's not a normal distribution if they're wider off the ground, right? And I also want to look at the volume of searches relative to that. So what I did was followed through with the Andrew Yang and Joe Biden, and then I looked at the top 6 or so relative terms based upon what Google sees as the most relevant things next to their name. So for Joe Biden, we have Joe Biden, John McCain. The next word is John Biden, Joe Biden, and John McCain, and it goes down for the top 6 or so searches related to Joe Biden. And Yang 2020, Andrew Yang 2020, 2020 Yang. It's the same thing for Andrew Yang. So to start with, we're going to look at the fatness of the tails of kurtosis and the distribution around that. So how I'm visioning this is something where we have some type of distribution. All right, we're going to take a look at this. And we want to know how fat this area is here, right? Between here and here. We want to know how fat that is. And based on what I'm seeing here is Joe Biden on the residual, the long tail stuff, has a higher average search volume, which would tell me that if we want to know the kurtosis of this, we could make probably an educated guess that for Joe Biden, this is wider, right? Instead of a normal distribution, it might look something like a little bit fatter tail on there. And I think that comes to just more awareness than Andrew Yang. However, the very interesting thing is that the number one search term that's most relevant, if you compare the two of those, the average monthly searches for Joe Biden was 1,000 to 10,000 searches on average, and it was 10,000 to 100,000 for Andrew Yang, which is a 10x increase. So the 10x increase, if you add up all the other searches where Joe Biden has a fatter tail in terms of that, it is actually more for Andrew Yang by a large margin, like 8-1 or something like that, relative to Joe Biden. So that was interesting. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention here is that I think it would be kind of interesting to run a test on these and report to you guys on that, but I don't want to spend the money. So if anybody wants to give me $60, I can run a split test with running $1 ad per day versus $1 ad per day for Joe Biden versus Andrew Yang on the same ad and see which one converts better, and I can give you guys that data. If anybody's interested, it would be $60. I'll show you exactly where I'm spending it. I'm not going to get it, but if somebody wants to help support that video, let me know. But if you want to also follow along with that next video that I'm going to come out with after this one, then make sure you press that subscribe button and that bell notification to get the one on how the methodology of polling is done and some interesting data on the latest polls out there. So make sure you stay tuned. Don't forget to press that thumbs up button so that this video can get in front of more people and we can see what's actually going on. Peace.